When it comes to villains, they come in a myriad of different flavors, shapes, and sizes. Sometimes you have your broken heroes like Nagato or Obito. Sometimes you get your ultra powerful dictator types like Madara and Danzo. But my personal favorite, and a vast majority favorite type of villain, is the unrepentant, unfixable sociopath. No weepy backstory to make you feel good for the villain, no trying to fix them to become a hero that they always were meant to be, an unrelenting, bloodthirsty, sociopathic monster with no goal other than sowing chaos. It's why I've always loved the Joker, and it's why I fell in love with Hidan. You see, Hidan is arguably the weakest member of the Akatsuki by a long stretch. He can't use ninjutsu, he's a religious zealot, and yet he's massively beloved. And this is because there was never any trying to save Hidan, there was never any trying to justify rationale with Hidan. He was just trying to kill people for his god. But how did Hidan end up falling into jashinism? What brought him to that point? And genuinely, who was he as a person? See, well, it's easy to kick up our feet here and laugh about how sociopathic or insane or unhinged Hidan was. At the end of the day, almost everything he did have a greater meaning to it. While he might seem like a one-note, relatively dry and explainable character, at the end of the day, he's actually rather complex. We've seen non-murderous interactions between him and people he doesn't even know. And his motivations for joining jashinism are a bit more complex and interesting than one might originally believe. On top of that, his power of immortality granted through jashinism raises a lot of still unanswered questions in Naruto. But hopefully, maybe we can answer at least some of them today. Because today, we're doing You Know Nothing About Hidan. But before we get to shining light on everybody's favorite religious zealot, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you want to see me work with the zeal of a religious maniac whose god is YouTube views, guys, go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where I talk about all other anime besides Naruto, like possibly JJK or Kill La Kill. So, Hidan, the second newest member of the Akatsuki, a part of the zombie duo, an unkillable jashinist with no ninjutsu prowess. And yet, even with no ability to use ninjutsu or genjutsu to any degree whatsoever, he still finds himself toe-to-toe in close battles against complete Shinchuriki. With simply devotion and strength of will towards his Lord Jashin, he has found a way to be talked about as one of the stronger members in the Naruto universe. And while when it boils down to it, the only member of the Akatsuki weaker than him is probably Black Zetsu, the fact that it took Kakashi and Inashikacho to defeat him does say a little bit towards his power. But who was Hidan? How did he start down the path of jashinism, and how did he end up in the Akatsuki? Well, let's start this video off in the way that we tend to start these videos off, at the beginning. The first thing we know about Hidan is that he grew up in the Land of Hot Water. Now, the Land of Hot Water is a small country that resides on the northeast corner of Konoha's border. And as it resides between Konoha and the Hidden Cloud, it can be assumed that just like with the Hidden Rain, it was often a battlefield for these two much larger countries. However, proximity to the two strongest ninja villages also has some perks, as the village hidden in Hot Water, which was originally a ninja village, just like how every other small country does have a hidden village, eventually decided that they didn't need a hidden village anymore. They realized any ninja work that they would need could simply be hired out from Konoha or the Hidden Cloud for arguably cheaper than it would be to train their own ninja. And since Konoha and the Hidden Cloud were so close, acquiring these ninja really wouldn't take that much time. Tie this into the fact that the Land of Hot Water was named the Land of Hot Water because they had a ton of natural hot springs. In the Land of Hot Water, dissolving its own ninja village starts to make sense, because instead of needing a ninja village, the Land of Hot Water's ninja village was actually converted to a tourist attraction, a tourist town where people from all over the continent could come and bathe in the hot springs of the Land of Hot Water. So now, not only did the Land of Hot Water not have to train its own ninjas, they were also getting outside revenue in the form of tourists. And in a world as hectic as Naruto's world, I too would occasionally like to dip my toes in an onsen. But things weren't always super awesome in the Land of Hot Water. It wasn't always hot baths and no ninjas. In fact, long before Hidan was even born, there once resided in the Land of Hot Water a clan by the name of the Shinoiki clan. Now, the Shinoiki clan were once a very powerful clan, and in fact, the presence of their clan is actually what kept the Land of Hot Water on the map in terms of a ninjascape for a long time, specifically during the Warring States period. The reason that the Shinoiki clan kept the Land of Hot Water on the map is because they had a natural dojutsu, a blood red set of eyes that made their genjutsu incredibly potent. And they could cast this genjutsu over enemies by making eye contact with them or by simply touching them, giving them a significant leg up in battle. On top of this, a lesser known ability of these eyes was also the ability to control liquids with high amounts of iron. And since usually liquids don't have high amounts of iron, this usually referred to blood. However, things took an unfortunate turn for the Shinoki clan when one of the women from the Shinoki clan married the Land of Lightning's daimyo. And shortly after their marriage, the Land of Lightning's daimyo died, and his death was subsequently blamed on his new wife. This quickly turned tides and feelings against her clan, and they were banned to the Valley of Hell. This was a sulfurous valley filled with a red lake, and this red lake was water that was incredibly rich with iron, and it was there where the Shinoki clan lived for generations, and it was there that Hidan found them. See, Hidan during his childhood had heard stories about the Valley of Hell and how the Shinoki clan was banished there. So as a child, Hidan ventured out of the hidden village of the Land of Hot Water to find the Valley of Hell, and much to his surprise, he found it. Hidan was disgusted by the smell of sulfur, but as he descended into the Valley of Hell, he stumbled upon the Shinoki clan. And while the Shinoki clan had lived in the Valley of Hell for generations, they unfortunately had some disagreements. Most importantly, their disagreements revolved around whether or not they should seek revenge against the Uchiha, since the Uchiha were the ones who banished them to the Valley of Hell. And as these ideologies grew in power against each other, so did the resentments. And in one singular night, the Shinoki clan killed each other off, leaving only 2 survivors. And this was the scene that Hidan stumbled upon. Fresh corpses covered in blood, not yet dry. Hidan had most likely found the clan the day after they killed each other off. And thus Hidan, as a child, returned to the hidden village of the Land of Hot Water and told them all about the mountain of corpses that he had found in the Valley of Hell. To which the people in his hidden village said,
"Well, of course they died down there. It was called the Valley of Hell. It was unhospitable. There was no way any clan could survive there."
And it's at this point that Hidan corrected them and stated they weren't skeletons, they didn't die generations ago. Their blood had not yet dried on fresh corpses. And to the people of Hidan's village, the timing just seemed a bit too convenient here. You're telling me this child simply found an entire eviscerated clan so fresh after their evisceration that their blood had still not yet dried? That this child hadn't stumbled upon a pile of bones that began decaying decades ago, but fresh bodies murdered within the day? It was at this point that people began to suspect Hidan, even though the idea that a child would be able to wipe out an entire clan was an abstract one, at least at that time. People began to look at Hidan like a demon, a child who had wandered off to the Valley of Hell and found hell itself. In fact, the suspicion against Hidan murdering this entire clan was so powerful that the village decided to send what few ninja they had to the Valley of Hell to investigate. And upon getting to the Valley of Hell, they determined that this assassination of the entire clan was an act done by the clan. But there were still many of those who were suspicious of Hidan, and justifiably. Who's to say whether or not this was the event that tipped Hidan towards his murderous path, or if he had always been along that path? A child trying to find something called the Valley of Hell isn't that crazy. A childlike curiosity to find a place of lore, even though that lore is relatively dark, is not unheard of. But a child stumbling upon an entire clan still fresh with the blood that they had used to kill each other in combat? Now that's the kind of thing that could warp a human being. And then to convey the information of what you found in this valley and have everyone believe you were the one who did it might put the idea in your mind that maybe you could have been the one to do it. Listen, I'm not trying to justify the ideologies of Hidan. I'm just trying to give us a better view into how he might have gotten there. And that Hidan, though he might have seemed like a manic one-note character, might have genuinely had a story that brought him to that point. So now Hidan, with the fresh images of death, watching neighbor kill neighbor, began to look around him and see how that kind of thing might happen here as well. See, as time progressed, the Land of Hot Water slowly descended from a hidden village to a tourist attraction. But the unfortunate timing of this is it was as Hidan was becoming a shinobi. So as Hidan was coming into age and training to be a shinobi, his village was cycling to make what he wanted to become irrelevant. But you could imagine that this wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to Hidan. One of the most integral and important things that happened in the entirety of Hidan's life revolved around death. Hidan had seen on a first-person basis just how prevalent violence still was in human society. At any given moment, a clan could be slaughtered by their neighbors. At any given moment, a clan could come under fire of another clan, a nation, another nation. Hidan, seeing the relevancy of shinobis being cycled out of the Hidden Water Village, felt like an overestimation of how peaceful this world was. He believed that shinobi were meant to kill, to slaughter, to come into combat, and his peaceful life in the Land of Hot Water was anything but that. And thus Hidan became infuriated with the path of his village. And since he believed that shinobi in the Land of Hot Water were meant to kill, cut, and defile, as he left the Land of Hot Water, he slaughtered his neighbors. Now, this is what I genuinely find to be one of the most important things and interesting things in Hidan's life. One, because it's incredibly symbolic of the teachings of Jashin that he hasn't even stepped into yet, and two, because it's incredibly representative of what Hidan has seen in his life up to this point. See, like I stated earlier, the Shinoiki clan murdered each other, neighbor against neighbor, in all-out battle of destruction and death of the greatest kind. And upon seeing this, Hidan believed this is what shinobi were meant to do. They were meant to kill. And for all intents and purposes, until Boruto, he's not wrong. You could say that shinobi are supposed to go on a myriad of different missions, and not all of them are assassinations or anything like that. But when it comes down to it, genuinely, the purpose of a shinobi is that of a soldier. And the purpose of a soldier is to kill. Of course, there's a myriad of subplots that any soldier can get into, but when it comes down to it, defensively or offensively, a soldier kills. But Hidan wasn't pointed at an enemy, and thus Hidan, as a soldier, simply killed who was closest to him. The irony of this is that that is a core tenet of jashinism. In order to give favor to Lord Jashin, yes, you should kill as many people as possible. And with every kill, you should offer up praise to Lord Jashin and offer their body to Lord Jashin. However, Hidan tells us that the true core tenet of jashinism is killing your neighbors. And it's worded like that. It is killing your neighbors. However, Hidan goes on to elaborate, this is much later on in his life, that it's not about physical proximity, it's about killing those you're close to, killing those you appreciate, those you love. And the more somebody is your neighbor, the more favor it grants to Lord Jashin. Because Jashinism isn't about just ending life, it's about destruction. And not just in the physical sense, in the spiritual sense. It's about the destruction of human bonds, giving up everything in favor of Lord Jashin. But Hidan, even before he joined Jashinism, murdered his neighbors. Hidan, long before he even left the village, watched neighbor murder neighbor. I want you to keep those 2 points with you for the rest of this video, and we'll circle back to them in a little bit. Obviously, after defecting from the Land of Hot Water, Hidan joined Jashinism. But quite honestly, this part of his life is relatively hazy. We don't necessarily understand what it means to join Jashinism, as we've only ever seen 2 Jashinists in the entirety of Naruto and Boruto. And Hidan was the first, and the second Jashinist was simply a Jashinist because he was inspired by Hidan. So we don't know if there was some cult or some sect that Hidan joined of other Jashinists, and if there's other Jashinists out there or other immortal people who maybe just weren't as powerful as Hidan, or if nobody was ever able to accomplish immortality like Hidan because Hidan could kill many more people than anybody else. Or if Jashinism doesn't actually exist. Once again, we're gonna keep that one for a little bit later. What we do understand about this time period were the tenets of Jashinism, where in essence you have to destroy everything in your life, and anything less than utter destruction is an egregious sin. But just because Hidan had defected from the Land of Hot Water didn't necessarily mean he had left the Land of Hot Water. He was just no longer a ninja for the Hidden Village. However, this was really bad timing for the Land of Hot Water because Hidan was like their only strong shinobi. In fact, as we talked on earlier, the Land of Hot Water was currently basically eliminating all of their shinobi, so they had no shinobi to go take out their now defect shinobi. And so in the anime, at least, the Land of Hot Water hires the Akatsuki to kill Hidan. This has always felt like a kind of weird explanation considering the fact that Konoha and the Hidden Cloud were right there, and that the Land of Hot Water had like a long existing relationship with both Konoha and the Hidden Cloud, but also this was just about right after the Third Great Shinobi World War, so maybe they were still pissed about Konoha and the Hidden Cloud using their country as a battlefield. Regardless, the Land of Hot Water hires the Akatsuki to kill Hidan because he's rampaging in the countryside and killing basically anybody he can get his hands on. And the Akatsuki are intrigued by this because they hear about an immortal in the Land of Hot Water, and thus Pain dispatches Kakuzo, Konan, and Itachi to go capture Hidan. The choice of sending these 3 people is also very weird to me, considering the fact the Akatsuki work in duos. Konan is Nagato's duo, Itachi is Kisame's duo, and Kakuzo didn't have a duo because he kept killing them. But at the same time, Nagato is like very historically protective of Konan and really wouldn't let her go a whole lot of places without him. And the same could be said like vice versa. I guess she was probably more protective of Nagato than he was of her. But still, weird team. And upon the Akatsuki tracking him down, because of course they did, Kakuzo and Hidan came into combat, and Itachi and Konan kind of just sat this one out, which is arguably the worst thing they could have done, because both Konan and Itachi are perfectly built to beat Hidan in a fight. Like genjutsu and long range / literally can't really bleed. I would love to see how short a battle between Hidan and Itachi would have been. It would have been fantastic. But regardless, Kakuzo and Hidan are fighting, and Hidan actually manages to destroy one of Kakuzo's hearts. As we all know, he has 4, so it's really not like the biggest deal. Upon seeing that Hidan has some legitimate power and that his questionable morals would actually serve the Akatsuki pretty well, Konan, who was the real leader of the Akatsuki, if we're being real, offers him a spot in the Akatsuki. Hidan, understanding that in the Akatsuki he would probably have even more chances to murder as many people as possible, says yes, but also because he's intrigued by Kakuzu. See, to Hidan, Kakuzu was a pioneer in immortality, one of the first people to ever figure out how to live forever, which is interesting. Hidan taking an interest in other people with immortality around him raises red flags in my head, and I don't necessarily know how to place those flags quite yet. But after joining the Akatsuki, Hidan and Kakuzo's first mission is to hunt down the Two-Tails Jinchuriki. The Two-Tails being Matatabi and the current Jinchuriki of Matatabi living in the Hidden Cloud, which was kind of perfect when you consider the fact that they were already in the land of hot water and the land of lightning is like literally right there. And Hidan and Kakuzo capture the Two-Tails Jinchuriki with no real issues. But that being said, her only real ability was the ability to shoot out hairballs made of fire, so wasn't the world's hardest capture. From here on out, obviously, Hidan spent a couple of years in the Akatsuki, and him and Kakuzo continued to be partners because Kakuzo literally could not kill him, and Hidan didn't want to kill him because he didn't consider Kakuzo a neighbor. Because even though Hidan did spend a massive amount of time with Kakuzo, he hates Kakuzo. And killing somebody you hate in jashinism doesn't equate to much for Lord Jashin. So there was never necessarily a motivation for Hidan to kill Kakuzo, and Kakuzo simply could not kill Hidan, so they were stuck with each other. And these couple of years in the Akatsuki took Hidan and Kakuzo a numerous amount of places. The best fleshed out example of Hidan's personality exists in Akatsuki Hidan, a light novel, where Kakuzo and Hidan have to descend into a valley known as the Valley of Lies, searching for somebody with a 1.5 billion Rio bounty. See, Hidan and Kakuzo weren't really on Jinchuriki gathering duty. I mean, they were because they killed the Two-Tails and the Seven-Tails Jinchurikis, but those were also arguably the 2 weakest Jinchuriki. More often than not, Kakuzo and Hidan were on money gathering missions. Now, this could have been because Kakuzo was just an incredibly money-driven person, and since he had seniority in the Akatsuki, he got to choose their missions. And in fact, we actually got to see an example of this when all of the Akatsuki were in the hideout, and it was Sasori, Deidara, Hidan, and Kakuzo discussing who should get a war mission and who should get a money gathering mission. To which, after seeing that Sasori and Deidara had no interest in the money collecting mission, Kakuzo said that the zombie duo would go do it. Now, this obviously upset Deidara because a war mission includes significantly more kills, and actually once again gives us a peek behind the rationale of Hidan while out on missions. See, for better or worse, Kakuzo and Hidan were essentially bounty hunters. They were trying to find people with large bounties in underground markets. They were, in essence, the two that kept the Akatsuki funded for the entirety of its life. And there is no better example of them keeping the Akatsuki funded than their chapter in the light novel Akatsuki Hidan. And this chapter opens with Hidan and Kakuzo trudging through the woods looking for this Valley of Lies. And Hidan tells Kakuzo he hasn't been able to kill anybody in days, a sin in the eyes of his Lord Jashin. However, it's at that point that Hidan and Kakuzo spot the man whose bounty they're looking for. And Hidan closes in like a dog to a treat and gets his blood on his sight. And it's at this point that Hidan starts using his cursed technique, dead blood controlling technique. And upon completing the circle around his body and stabbing himself through the heart, the man whose bounty they were looking to collect dies. However, before Hidan can give this body up to Lord Jashin, a little boy emerges from the woods. And this little boy isn't afraid of Hidan or Kakuzo, he's actually just curious about how Hidan's abilities work. And while initially this little boy annoyed Hidan because he asked a bunch of questions, once the little boy expressed interest in joining the Lord of Jashin's religion, Hidan lit up. Hidan began giving this child, whose name was Hohozuki, a bunch of lessons on how to best serve faith to the Lord Jashin. It's the first and only time we've ever seen Hidan show interest in a person. The first time we've ever seen Hidan not immediately try to kill somebody. This boy then went on to show Kakuzo and Hidan where his village was. And it's eventually revealed that this village was hidden with genjutsu, which is why Hidan and Kakuzo were never able to find it. But it was hidden with genjutsu because everybody who lived in the village had a bounty on their heads. And as they make their way to this village, Hohozuki and Hidan continue talking about jashinism. And Hohozuki has already decided that he wants to join in the religion. However, Hohozuki has some qualms, some fears, that he may not be as strong as the people on Earth who advocate for peace, and thus will be killed before he can give his full worship to the Lord Jashin. However, Hidan, in a very interesting moment of character development for Hidan, tells Hohozuki that people who advocate for peace don't exist, saying that when Hidan was leaving the village and he was trying to kill his neighbors for being peaceful, the shinobi of the village tried to kill him first, stating that if these shinobi truly loved peace, they would have let themselves die, which is backwards logic, but if you get into the meat of it, it kind of makes a little bit of sense. In essence, what Hidan is saying, that anybody who truly believes in peace above all should never come into conflict, even if it means their own life. In essence, Hidan is saying a twisted version of Naruto trying to break the cycle of hatred. By responding to violence with other greater violence, you are in essence spitting in the face of peace. If you look at it from a sense of morality, it's actually a rather interesting argument. In a more nihilistic vein, the grander schemes of what happens on Earth have no true sense of morality. Who's to say one action is inherently worse than the other in the grand scheme of the universe? And while we as humans are emotional beings and therefore tie meaning to life, we will give up the notion of peacefulness if it means peace. What does that mean? Well, usually the path to peace is paved in blood. Take World War II, for example. The armies of the world collaborated in a battle against the Axis powers and killed millions of Axis power soldiers for peace. The very notion of going to war is not a peaceful action, but the end goal is peace. Hidan is arguing that if these countries who unified in their battle against the Axis powers truly wanted peace, they should have just let themselves die and never come to war. Now, is this the right way to think? No, but it does nonetheless give us a very interesting window into Hidan's psychology. However, just because Hidan was willing to teach Hohozuki about jashinism doesn't mean they were really best friends. Because after Kakuzo goes to deal with the leader of the village hidden in the Valley of Lies, assuming that the leader of the village would have the highest bounty, Kakuzo tells Hidan to deal with Hohozuki, to which Hidan does very willingly. However, after a couple of things happen, it's found out that Hohozuki is actually a boy by the name of Amayuki, and Amayuki is still enthralled with the teachings of Lord Jashin. And because Amayuki wants to join the religion of jashinism, and he respects Hidan for telling him about it, he considers Hidan a neighbor and also wants to kill him. And after a little bit of a scuffle, Hidan is able to acquire Amayuki's blood and do his ritual. It's at this point that Hidan tells Amayuki he's going to kill him, and Amayuki reveals that's what he wants. Amayuki had received a lot of discrimination as a child because of his mud-release Kekkei Genkai, and had unfortunately been complicit in the death of one of his closest friends, Hohozuki. And because he felt so guilty about the death of his friend, he figured being a sacrifice to Lord Jashin would be the best way for him to go. However, Amayuki made one request of Hidan before his death. Amayuki wanted to make a sacrifice to Lord Jashin, and Hidan actually granted him this request. As to whether or not it was because it would be giving power to Lord Jashin or because Hidan actually liked Amayuki, Hidan let Amayuki cause a landslide that killed the entirety of his village. And Hidan actually patted Amayuki on the back for this. He said he was proud of his first ritual and that he should be happy with himself. And then Hidan stabbed himself through the heart and gave Amayuki exactly what he wanted. It was at this point that Kakuzo rushed back to Hidan and told Hidan that he needed help collecting all of these bodies for bounties, telling Hidan to rush his post-killing ritual. But Hidan doesn't rush the ritual. In fact, he tells Kakuzo he's gonna take longer than usual to do this ritual, because he wasn't just doing this ritual on any old body, he was doing this ritual on a martyr. In a short amount of time, because somebody had expressed interest in Lord Jashin, Hidan grew a profound amount of respect for them. And the thing is, Hidan killing Amayuki is genuinely, in Hidan's mind, one of the kindest thing Hidan could do for him. Obviously, there is the fact that Amayuki wanted to die because of his complicity in his best friend's death. But you also have to look at this from Hidan's perspective. Hidan believes that when he kills somebody, he's giving them to God, and that the destruction of physical and emotional humanity, Jashin is getting more power, and he's making the earth a better place. Hidan, maybe for the first time in his life, found a compatriot and showed real compassion and restraint towards that compatriot. While to many, Hidan might seem like an irrational sociopath, when he found a common interest with somebody, he opened up. He showed restraint. He allowed Amayuki to do his first ritual. And more importantly than anything, he put Amayuki's body to rest. Hidan is actually a really good representation of a lot of people. And while I'm not saying that these people should be given forgiveness or anything like that, but Hidan is the perfect example of somebody who goes through something incredibly traumatic as a child. Something that warps their neurological networks, that warps the landscape of their brain, that changes how somebody thinks about life, connection, humanity, physicality, emotion. To an outsider, the way Hidan approaches life is reckless, psychological, sociopathic. But when you sit back and you look at Hidan, there is nobody in the entirety of Naruto who is more true to their convictions than him. And yes, those convictions are murder, so I mean, it would be kind of nice if he strayed from the path, like, even a little bit. But in essence, Hidan represents neurodivergency on the highest level, a complete disconnect from the emotional spectrum of humanity, all in order to give severance to a god who might not even exist. See, the irony of the story of Amayuki is that Kakuzo believes that Amayuki wanted to get into jashinism to help justify the loss of Hohozuki. And in that one small moment, we might actually get a better window into Hidan than Amayuki. No other person has ever achieved immortality, even though we've seen people get into jashinism. Amayuki did his first ritual, which killed hundreds of people. The jashinists from the Steam Ninja Scrolls killed hundreds of people, all hoping to gain immortality. And yet the only person to ever accomplish it was Hidan. But what if the story of Amayuki trying to get into jashinism to justify what he had done in his earlier life wasn't a story specific to Amayuki? What if this chapter was more a reflection of the story of Hidan? People are born with abnormalities in the Naruto universe all the time. Hashirama was born with a healing factor said to be on par with mitotic regeneration. People of the Hoki clan were born with an ice release Kekkei Genkai. Amayuki was born with mud release. What if Hidan was just born with immortality? And along the paths of a long, traumatic, misunderstood childhood, Hidan had to find a way to justify the way he felt. From the very beginning, Hidan saw neighbor kill a neighbor. From the very beginning, Hidan saw a world that didn't dole out justice for an entire clan being massacred by each other. All Hidan saw was the decay of the shinobi system in his own life when he himself wanted to be a shinobi, and that when neighbor killed neighbor, nothing really ever came of it. The Shinyo clan were a long forgotten clan that all came together to murder each other. And because of this, nobody really cared when they disappeared for the second time. So Hidan, confused about his feelings, seeing neighbor kill neighbor, being built into a shinobi system that told him he was no longer needed, decided to kill those around him, his actual neighbors. And upon leaving the land of hot water, made a religion called jashinism, self-delusional split of personality that made him believe in a god that gave him his abilities, a never-ending justification for all of the feelings he holds within. Sure, you can destroy and defeat everybody who will ever get close to you, and guess what? You're doing it for a greater good. The separation of a terrible deed for a greater good is something that happens every single day. It just seems fantastical because Hidan was born with immortality. Sure, what Hidan was able to accomplish in terms of murder was very impressive, but do you genuinely believe that there's nobody out there who could kill as many as Hidan has? Do you believe there's no one out there who's ever received the blessing of Jashin? In Konoha Hidan, another light novel, Konoha actually sent shinobi to look for more Jashinists and couldn't find any. So what seems more likely to you? A boy born with immortality thrust into a world that didn't understand him, or a man who found a god that nobody else can find? For me, the mountain of evidence seems to fall on the misunderstood boy, because God knows we see that story every single day. And just like with that story we see every single day, the system didn't try to fix or help Hidan. It tried to kill him off or use him. But what do I know? There's no way to know if there's actually a Lord Jashin out there. I mean, in the Boruto manga, we just got introduced to a quite literal Otsutsuki god who might have been able to confer immortality to others. So in actuality, did Hidan just happen to bump into Shibai Otsutsuki? Who knows? How about you guys tell me what you think in the comments below? And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I can see the headlines already. Nick sympathizes with serial killer. Not the point I was trying to get across, okay? Obviously, very bad dude.